Hello and welcome to Creating a Fall-Resistant Body. I'm your host, Coach Ken Dobberpuhl. As we age, we tend to have two major concerns. One is trying to maintain our independence for as long as possible, and the other is avoiding falls. We've all seen the statistics on falls in older adults, and we want to try to mitigate this as much as possible in our lives. So what you're going to learn in this sequence of fall resistance videos is how you can prevent a fall, what the distinction is between fall prevention and fall resistance, categories of falls, tips for fall proofing your home, some physical reasons why people fall, and finally we'll finish up with how you can develop a fall resistant program at home. We're going to make the distinction between fall prevention and fall resistance. And I like to say that fall prevention tends to deal more with environmental factors that we have some control over, or sometimes we don't if we're out in the real world, but around the house and so forth. So fall prevention tends to focus more on the immediate environment that we're in. Fall resistance are the physical things that we're able to do to prevent a fall. And we're going to talk about some exercises and some drills that you can do to create that fall resistant body. So as we continue along looking at creating a fall resistant body, we'll be looking at things like static and dynamic balance, the difference between those and how you can train them. We're going to talk about creating sufficient eccentric strength. That may be a term that you're not familiar with, but it is essentially the ability to decelerate. So if you take any movement, like say starting a squat, as we go down, if we can control it, that's eccentrically loading the muscles. In other words, we're slowing our departure down, we're not just dropping. The other, one of the other characteristics that we can definitely train is reaction time. And so getting that nervous system fired up and ready to take on whatever we encounter. And finally, the other physical thing to be aware of is we have an expression of keeping our base of support outside of our center of gravity. So in this case, obviously, when I'm standing like this, my base of support are my feet. And as long as my feet are outside of my center of gravity, which is right about where my belly button is, we have a stable situation. But if we get our feet too close together and we start to lean and get that center of gravity outside the base of support, we're setting ourselves up for a fall. So those are some things that we can physically work on, and we're going to take and kind of tease those apart as the video continues. Next, let's talk about some categories of falls. There's two types of falls basically. There's slips and there's trips. And I suppose we could also add to that a collapse. Trips and slips are pretty self-explanatory. Collapsing can occur from a number of things. Being a little bit lightheaded when you get up due to low blood pressure. It could be from a side effect from a medication. So these are things that we kind of put in that whole mix of when we categorize a fall as a slip, a trip, or a collapse. When it comes to fall proofing the home, most of this is pretty much common sense, but we'll run through a few basics. Having things like motion lights, making sure that you don't have loose throw rugs on the floor, long electrical cords and so forth running across, pets and pet toys, pet beds, kids, grandkids toys. These are all things that we need to be very aware of in our environment. And if you live in a cold climate, during the winter time, this becomes even more challenging. We want to make sure that we have adequate footwear for the conditions. If you live in an icy area, you might consider wearing some of those little attachable cleats to your shoes to keep you from slipping, salt on the sidewalk, shoveling off snow, all those things. So one of the best things I would recommend if you're curious about doing a fall proofing of your home is to go online and just put into the search bar fall prevention checklist for home safety. There are a number of organizations like AARP, National Institute of Health, National Council of Aging. They all have suggested checklists for your home so that you can do that survey on your own and make sure your home is nice and safe. So now let's take a look at some physical reasons why people fall. One of the most obvious is muscle weakness, not being able to catch yourself when you do slip or trip, and about keeping our base of support outside of our center of gravity. So always making sure that we have a nice wide stance and that it's outside of that base of support. We've all seen older folks that their gait becomes greatly compressed, they're not picking their feet up, and they're shuffling. We should probably also mention, along with this, inappropriate footwear. Things like flip-flops, Crocs, or some slippers may not be appropriate footwear in your living conditions. One of the other physical reasons why people fall are conditions of the ears, losing hearing, conditions like Meniere's, where when people look up, those inner ear tubules cause them to have vertigo or some other sensation where they just don't feel stable. Slow reflexes or slow reactions would be another reason people fall. Another physical reason is low blood pressure issues or problems when we go from laying to sitting or sitting to standing. Sometimes these conditions will cause us to be dizzy and fall. Things like neuropathy, where we start to lose a sensation or feeling in the feet, can be an issue for a lot of folks. Vision-related problems, another thing. So making sure that we have well-lit areas throughout the home, and that you've got, if you need corrective lenses and so forth, that you're wearing your glasses. Don't forget to wear them if you have them. Neurological conditions such as Parkinson's disease obviously can affect or increase the chance of a fall. So we've got to be extra careful if we're dealing with that kind of a situation. Orthopedic issues. Many of us, as we get older, have had to have replacement parts, knees and hips and so forth. And sometimes we have to learn all over how to walk. And so these are situations that we need to be aware of and really make sure you follow through with your PT and so forth if you've had a hip replacement or knee replacement, so that you're as stable and strong as you can be. Medication side effects. Sometimes we don't think about these things, but if you're on multiple medications, sometimes there may be an interaction or a side effect from one of these medications which could cause you to feel dizzy and fall. And probably the last thing I would like to mention is making sure that we adjust our gait to the conditions that we're in. This is primarily outside, where we're looking at transitions from going from gravel, off of a curb, walking downhill on a trail, those types of things. So typically when we walk, we're doing a heel to toe rocking motion, where a heel hits and we rock forward. The one thing I would like to really emphasize when we're talking about adjusting gait to our conditions is when you're walking downhill, I would like you to consider making sure that your forefoot or the whole foot is hitting or striking the ground as close to the angle of that terrain as possible, and that you keep your knees bent and sort of sit back a little bit. So it's kind of like you're sneaking down the hill. Keep your feet wide and try to get your foot to land at the same angle as the terrain. That's a really important tip for you, because if you're going downhill and it's gravelly or loose rock and you strike with your heel, you're most likely going to have your foot come out from under you. So practice that if you're out on a trail or in conditions that are a little bit loose and slippery.